No one ever proposed to Dr. Clara Rowe. In a dusty frontier town where men preferred wives who baked pies, not reset bones, she was tolerated, not admired. Respected, perhaps, but from a distance. She delivered babies, stitched gunshot wounds, and walked alone to her cabin every night. The townsfolk said she was too serious, too sharp, too educated. She never argued. She just kept working, quiet, alone, and necessary. Then came the giant. He rode in like thunder, 6'7", built like a legend, silent as dusk. No one knew his name. They only saw the way he lifted a wagon with one hand to free a trapped child, the way he bent iron without effort, the way he looked at Clara like she was the only thing not small in this world. And one day, without preamble or poetry, he stepped into her office, took off his hat, and said, "I need a wife, and you need strong sons." He didn't smile, didn't blink, just waited. And for the first time in her life, Dr. Clara Rowe forgot how to speak.
The sun rose slow over Dry Creek, casting a blood-orange haze across the dust and cracked timber buildings. The town creaked to life like an old man rolling out of bed, grudgingly, stiffly, out of habit more than hunger. Inside the clapboard clinic near the edge of town, Dr. Clara Rowe scrubbed her hands with water gone lukewarm and bitter. Her fingers ached from sewing stitches in a drunkard's thigh until past midnight. Her spine burned from sleeping upright in a chair too small for her thoughts. The cot in the corner sat untouched. She hadn't lain in it in 3 nights. Not since the mine accident. Not since the boy with the crushed ribs stopped breathing at dawn. No one blamed her. No one thanked her either. That was the way of it. The townsfolk nodded at her on the street. Some even touched their brims. But none invited her to dinner. None asked how she was sleeping. She was Doctor, never Clara. Necessary, not wanted. And in a place like Dry Creek, that difference cut deep. She tied her apron tighter and stepped outside. The light hit her sharp in the face. Heat was already crawling across the street, warping the air above the dirt. She crossed the road toward the general store, counting the steps automatically, brushing off the glares of men who still thought women shouldn't wear boots or carry medical bags. That's when she saw him. He stood beside the blacksmith's well, arms crossed, chest bare under a warm leather vest, a hat pulled low over eyes that didn't seem interested in anything but distance. He was massive, 6.5 feet at least, muscles like quarried stone, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved rather than born, the kind women whispered about behind hands and men stared at with suspicion. He didn't smile, didn't spit, just watched her as she passed. Their eyes locked for half a second. She didn't flinch, but she felt it, a shift, like when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. She didn't know his name. No one did. He'd arrived 2 days ago on a black horse with no saddle and a burlap sack slung across his back. Paid for supplies and gold dust. Didn't speak more than a yes or no. But he'd already helped lift a wagon off a child's leg without breaking a sweat, repaired 2 fences, and scared off a drifter with a single look. That was enough to make people wary. That, and his size. And now he was in her clinic.
She heard the floor groan under his weight before she saw him enter. Her hands paused mid-motion as she sorted gauze. He stepped through the door, removed his hat, and nodded once. No blood. No limp. No visible reason to be there. Just a silence that carried weight. She blinked, then gestured to the examination table. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He didn't move, just looked at her. Not at her dress or her hair or the curve of her hip like other men, but directly. Calm. Measured. His voice came low, rough as gravel. "I need a wife." She froze. The words landed like a nail in a floorboard. He didn't shift his weight, didn't blink. "And you need strong sons." She stared. Her brain scraped for logic, context, anything to explain what she'd just heard. This wasn't a proposal. not even a flirtation. It was a statement. Clinical, as if he were diagnosing her instead of the other way around. "Excuse me," she said at last, voice cool. He didn't repeat himself, just waited, as if silence could do the rest. She folded her arms. "That's not how things are done." He nodded once. "I know." She wanted to laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. He looked like he could break a horse in half, and yet stood before her like a farmer asking for rain. No pleading, no performance, just certainty. She took a step back. "You should go," she said. He didn't argue, just replaced his hat and walked out as silently as he'd come. She stood in the doorway long after he left, heart pounding, not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen her not as a tool, not as a title, but as a woman. And not just that, he hadn't asked for her kindness, he hadn't tried to charm or flatter. He'd looked at her like something unbreakable, something worth building a future on. And Clara, who hadn't believed in love since her mother died coughing up blood in the next room, suddenly couldn't stop thinking about a man who barely spoke, but said more with one sentence than anyone ever had. The town called him dangerous. Maybe he was, but danger never looked her in the eye and offered permanence before.
Clara didn't speak of it. She didn't tell the nurse, or the barkeep, or the school teacher who always lingered too long in her clinic pretending to need ointment. But the words he'd said replayed in her mind, like a fever that wouldn't break. "I need a wife, and you need strong sons." It was absurd, primitive, arrogant. She told herself so more than once, tried to laugh at the memory as she cleaned surgical tools or wrote prescriptions. But the laugh never came, because it wasn't what he'd said that unsettled her. It was how certain he'd been, how quietly, solidly certain. He hadn't made a pass, he hadn't even looked at her with want. It was as if he saw something in her no one else did, something she didn't fully see herself anymore. That scared her more than desire ever could. And the town didn't help. Dry Creek had a way of turning whispers into wind. Within days, she caught side glances from women at the well, heard murmurs behind crates at the mercantile. "Did you hear what the giant said to the doctor? I heard he tried to claim her like land." Maybe she said yes. She's not exactly drowning in options. Clara endured it with the same grit she used for broken bones and infection. Swallow, tighten, move forward. But it chipped at her all the same. Until one afternoon she cracked. It was a child, a 6-year-old boy, fevered, lungs thick with something angry and fast. She worked for hours, knees in the dirt beside a cot too small, sweat dripping into her collar. When the boy's breathing slowed and steadied, she allowed herself to lean back, just for a moment. That's when her legs gave out, her vision swam. The heat outside clung to her like oil, and her limbs felt like hollow sticks. She didn't faint, not really, but the street tilted, and suddenly she was on her hands and knees in the dust, breath coming in shallow gulps. People watched. No one moved. Until he did. She didn't see him coming, just felt the ground shake slightly beneath his boots. Then his arms were around her, solid, warm, steady. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, one arm under her knees, the other cradling her back. She tried to protest. Her pride rose like bile, but her throat refused sound. He carried her not to the clinic, to the cabin behind it, the one she almost never entered, the one built for rest she never allowed herself. He kicked the door open gently with one boot and placed her on the bed like something breakable. Then he left. No lingering, no gloating, just silence. When she awoke, the room was dark but cool. A glass of water sat on the table beside her, beads of condensation gathering on the rim. And on the floor, folded neatly, were her boots, wiped clean. She sat up slowly. Her chest ached, not from illness, but from the unfamiliar weight of having been carried,
of being seen again as something worth lifting. The next day, she found him in the alley behind the feed store, repairing a broken fence without being asked. She walked up slowly, unsure what she planned to say, but when he looked at her, just briefly, and tipped his hat, she froze. "Why are you doing this?" His brow furrowed. "This," she gestured, "to the town, the fence, the way he stepped in without invocation but never overstepped. You don't know me." He studied her a long moment. Then he said, "I know enough." "And what is it you think you know?" His eyes didn't waver. "You're alone, not because you want to be, but because they think you're too much." Her breath caught. "And you?" "I think they're not enough." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from heat, not from ghosts, but from the feeling of something beginning. Something steady and terrifying.
He never asked again. Not about sons, not about marriage, not about anything. After that day in the dust, after lifting her without a word, he simply became part of the town's rhythm. Or rather, the town shifted around him. He was at the well when the pump stuck, at the schoolhouse when the steps broke, at the churchyard the morning the bell rope snapped in two. He never spoke, unless spoken to, but his silence was not absence. It was a kind of constant, heavy, grounded, like the mountains in the distance. Clara found herself adjusting to it without realizing. She noticed when he wasn't nearby, not with panic, but with a strange lack, like a door left slightly ajar in the wind. When he did appear, her breath steadied, her spine straightened. She'd never felt that with a man before. Most men entered rooms like they owned the walls, the air, her space. He entered like someone willing to carry a house, but never force his way into it. And he never touched her again, not once. Not even to hand her tools when he helped in the clinic, which he now did without being asked. He mopped blood once from the floor after she amputated a miner's toe, held a lantern steady during a childbirth with hands that didn't shake even when the screaming started, hauled buckets of water from the creek when the town's supply ran dry. Still, no one knew his name. They called him the Giant, or the Ox, or sometimes simply him. But the tone was changing. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was caution, respect even. He wasn't like the others. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't chase skirts, and he didn't flinch when children ran too close or dogs barked at his heels. Clara began to wonder where he'd come from. She watched him in the evenings, sometimes from the back window of the clinic, as he walked toward the edge of town, always toward the same ridge. She followed once, not close enough to be noticed, she hoped, and saw where he slept. Not in a house, not even in the abandoned cabin near the wash. He slept under the stars, beside a boulder shaped like a bent knee, a blanket, a canteen. That was it. The next day she left a basket beside it, bread, bandages, a shirt with buttons still intact. He didn't mention it, but she saw him wear the shirt 2 days later. That same afternoon, a man named Avery caught her outside the clinic. He was a store hand, full of dust and vinegar, never much liked by women for good reason. "You really letting that giant court you?" he asked, voice thick with the confidence of a man too used to saying what he pleased. Clara didn't answer, just stared until he stepped back, muttering. But the damage was done. The gossip turned again. This time, not cruel, but curious. "Have you seen the way he looks at her? They say she treats his wounds. I'd be scared to marry a man who could crush a skull." But Clara wasn't scared. That was the strangest part. She feared cholera, she feared war returning to the border, she feared her own heart betraying her again, but not him. One evening, she stood at the back of the clinic, watching dusk press down over the ridge. She didn't expect him to be there, but he was, leaning against the water barrel, arms crossed, face half lit by the dying sun. "You didn't say yes." The first time he'd brought it up since. She turned, met his gaze. "You didn't ask again." He nodded. Didn't want to force something sacred. The word struck her like a stone to the chest. Sacred. No one had ever called her that. Not her hands, bloodied from stitching limbs. Not her voice, sharp from years of loneliness. Not her name, worn down by death and long winters.
"You don't even know if I can have sons," she said quietly. "Doesn't matter. I asked for a wife, not a womb." She swallowed hard. Her throat ached with things she hadn't dared believe. "What if I never say yes?" He didn't look away. "Then I'll keep working near the clinic, in case you change your mind." That night, Clara sat alone in her cabin, fingers pressed to her lips, heart pounding with something not fear, but a memory of how it felt to belong nowhere. And the realization that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to live like that forever.
The sickness came like a whisper, soft, slow, then suddenly everywhere. First, it was a cough, then fever, then children too weak to sit up. The saloon emptied out, schools shut down, men stopped shaking hands, mothers stopped cooking for anyone but their own. Clara worked without sleep. She moved from house to house with her satchel slung low, dress soaked with sweat and bleach. She boiled linens, cut blisters, mixed herbs into bitter teas that did little but offer hope. She gave everything she had, but it wasn't enough. 3 died in the first week: an old rancher, a 6-year-old girl, a woman Clara had once played cards with on a lonely winter night. She buried each with hands that no longer shook but didn't feel either. The town grew quieter, doors closed tighter, and still she kept going, until her knees gave out behind the apothecary. No one saw, no one helped, except him. He caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms around her waist, lifting her with ease. She didn't resist, not this time. He didn't speak, just carried her back to the clinic, placed her on the floor near the fire, and fetched water like it was the most natural thing in the world. She expected him to leave once she'd caught her breath, but he didn't. He stayed, day after day, shadowing her like a second pair of hands. He dug graves, boiled instruments, held down fevered bodies during seizures without flinching. He let her sleep in the cot when her body finally collapsed for good, and sat at the door with a rifle across his lap, guarding her dreams. Not because there was danger outside, but because peace like that, rest, was something he wouldn't let the world steal from her. When she woke and found him there, his head lowered, breathing slow, she didn't speak, just watched him. In the stillness she saw not the size of him, but the steadiness, the gravity, the patience.
When she moved to stand, her hand brushed his knee, and he stirred, blinking slowly like a bear roused by snowmelt. "You stayed," she whispered. He nodded once. "You always stay." Another nod. "Why?" she asked, and this time he answered. "Because I saw you before anyone else did." She didn't reply, but when she passed him that day, brushing against his arm by accident, she didn't apologize. And when he brought her coffee the next morning, she drank it without looking away. When a third wave of fever swept through town, she collapsed in the middle of a delivery. A mother screaming, a baby coming fast, and Clara's hands covered in blood, not the patient's, but her own, where she'd sliced her palm open by mistake. He stepped in without asking, took the child with rough hands that turned suddenly gentle, cradled it, cleaned it, placed it in the mother's arms. Clara leaned against the wall, breath gone, pride stripped. But when she looked at him, this man who'd once said she needed strong sons, she didn't feel weak. She felt something else. Safe. That night he stood outside her cabin, arms folded. He didn't knock, just waited. When she opened the door, he didn't move. "Are you here to ask again?" she said, voice tired. He shook his head. "I came to say something else." "What?" "I'm staying, whether you want me or not." Her heart pounded. "That's not how this works." "It is now." And with that, he stepped back into the darkness, leaving her in the doorway, not with anger or fear, but something new. The realization that maybe she wasn't strong because she had to be. Maybe she was strong because someone finally stood beside her.
The fever broke with the rain, a steady drizzle that washed the dust from roofs and the fear from streets. Doors opened slowly. Children came out barefoot, squinting at the daylight like something foreign. The town began to breathe again. Clara stood at the clinic window, watching fog rise from the ridge. The air smelled clean, damp, hopeful. But inside her, something stayed tangled. Not grief, not relief, something between. For weeks, he'd been everywhere, a shadow at her shoulder, a steady hand at her side. Now, without him, the silence returned, but it no longer felt like peace. It felt like absence. She found herself turning corners, expecting to see him, reaching for supplies, expecting him to pass her the jar, watching the door creak open, hoping. But he didn't come, not for 3 days. And when he did, just once, it was from a distance. She saw him across the square, loading sacks of feed into a wagon for the church orphanage. His shirt was dark from rain, hair slicked to his neck. He didn't look at her, didn't wave, just moved like always, slow, deliberate, strong. She went to him that night. No plan, no speech, just her body walking before her mind could catch up. The field behind the ridge was wet, but not flooded. His bedroll still lay beside the boulder. He sat there, whittling something with a dull blade, back resting against stone, a small fire crackling between them. He looked up when she stepped into the light. No surprise, no smile, just her name. Clara. She stopped 3 feet away. I don't know how to do this. I'm not good at it. He said nothing. People talk. They say I'm too cold, too smart, too much. They're not wrong, he said quietly. You are. She flinched, but he wasn't finished. You're too much for anyone who only wants half a woman. The words hit soft but deep. She looked away. Then why haven't you come back? He set the blade down. Because I didn't want you to say yes just because I stayed. She stepped closer. I'm not saying yes. His brow lifted slightly. I'm saying, I don't want to go back to how it was. Not because I need sons or help or safety, but because when you're near, I remember I'm still alive. The silence between them held. Then he stood, all 6 feet, 7 inches, of him looming, wide, quiet. And if I leave, will you still stand? Her throat tightened. I've done enough standing alone. He took a step forward. Then sit. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. She sank onto a log beside the fire, damp seeping through her skirt, hair sticking to her cheeks. He sat too, not beside her, but near enough. Their hands rested between them, not touching. She scare me, she admitted, because I can't read you. That's because I don't speak unless I mean it. So when you said, I meant it. Even now? Especially now. Her breath shook. She looked at the fire, then at his hands, then finally at him. Then stay. He didn't nod, didn't move. Just watched her like a man watching the ground thaw after a long winter. And slowly, one of his fingers brushed hers. Not a claim, not a possession, just a presence. And in that quiet, nothing else was needed.
It didn't last, of course. Nothing that soft ever does without being tested. 2 weeks passed like a dream she didn't dare name. Slow mornings, quiet glances, shared bread by the window. He came to the clinic every evening. Didn't sleep inside, but near. Enough that she heard his breath as she left the door open. And she always left the door open. The town began to say different things now. Not behind her back, but to her face. You seem lighter. You're not limping from your hip anymore. He's good for you. And once, from a woman she'd once delivered twins for, you're not alone anymore. But just as she began to believe it, truly believe it, the past came. Not hers. His. She saw the wagon before she saw the rider. Clean wheels, polished leather, city weight. A woman sat inside, blonde, painted, stiff as porcelain. The man beside her wore a suit too warm for the West. They stopped in front of the clinic, asked her name, asked his. She lied. Said she hadn't seen him in days. Watched their eyes narrow. Watched the women glance down at a gold band in her palm. He promised, she said softly. He said, once the land was ready, I'd come. Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't speak, just turned, went back inside, and locked the door. He found her that night, sitting at the edge of the cot, hands still, spine straight. You didn't tell me, she said before he could speak, because there was nothing to tell. She thinks you belong to her. I don't. But you did. Before I knew you. Her breath caught, like something delicate breaking inside her. What happens now? He was silent. Then, softly, whatever you choose. And she stood, took her bag, walked out. Past the fire, past the ridge, past the place where his voice had once steadied her. She didn't cry. Not then. Not until she reached the chapel and sat on the back steps, clutching nothing but her silence. He found her just before dawn. Not with a horse, not with words. Just himself. Covered in dust. Eyes darker than she remembered. She's gone. The ring, too. She didn't answer. I should have told you. Still nothing. Clara. Her name, on his lips, sounded like the beginning of something sacred again. If you leave, I'll still stay. I'll stay in this town, in this dirt, in the shadow of the place where I met you. But I'll never ask again. She looked at him, this giant of a man who could break trees with his fists, but stood before her like a boy, afraid to lose his only shelter. And finally she spoke. Then don't ask. She stepped forward, reached for his hand, and just come with me. They walked back together, not holding hands, not kissing in the street, but with a silence between them that no longer felt like distance. It felt like belonging. That night, he didn't sleep by the door. He slept in her bed, boots off, shirt folded, one arm beneath her shoulders, steady as stone. She didn't dream of sons, or marriage, or gold rings. She dreamed of his voice calling her name. Not as a promise, but as a home.